Hi, this is Julie, and welcome to Throwback Thursday. In honor of Mother's Quest turning 5, this season 7 of the podcast will bring episodes to you every Thursday. In addition to new episodes, we'll also share some powerful conversations from the archives. Keep in mind while listening that you may hear about some events or offerings that are no longer current. But whether you've heard this episode before or it's new to you, I hope you'll find something here as relevant as ever to light your way. This month in the Mother's Quest community, we've been celebrating the power of books. It made me think about this past episode with my mother, Fran, and her dear friend, Sandy Klasky, about their then 50-year-old book club. This year, the book club will be turning 55 and is still going strong, even through the pandemic. Listen to this conversation and you'll be inspired by the importance of friendship, the potential of books to bring people together, and the lessons we can learn from two grandmothers who have been through challenging times in our country and have lessons to share with us about what got them through. Follow the links in the show notes for some other invitations that will help you celebrate the power of books this summer. Now, on to the show. Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to two high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? It's a joy and honor to bring this final episode of Season 2, episode number 34, with my own mother, Fran Lieberman, and her dear friend, Sandy Klasky, who are celebrating their book club's 50th anniversary. I couldn't think of a more special way to close this season than reflecting with two women who are mothers and grandmothers on the lessons of their epic lives across decades, how they've passed on values of social justice to their children and grandchildren, the power of friendship, and of shared experiences like reading books together to build community. Before I share more about what we discuss in this episode, I want to introduce Emily Cretella of Mother Hustle with this episode's dedication.
Hi, this is Emily Cretella, founder of MotherHustle.com, and I am so proud to dedicate this episode of Mother's Quest to my mother, Mary Bonnier Malone. So I truly believe that the strong relationships in my life, from my best friendships to my marriage, stem from my mother's influence and of how she was really able to model the importance of friendship, love, and compassion for me every day growing up. My mom has worked at a home and school for adults with severe autism for her entire professional life. When I was young, she would work overnights so that she could be home with me and my younger sister. Her job took, and definitely still takes, a lot of patience and strength, yet she was a happy, graceful presence in our everyday. She was and still is also really creative. She would take basket weaving classes, and she knits, and she sews, and she makes beautiful and fun things. My mom also prioritized friendships, and she still gets together with her best friends from high school, two of which are my godparents. When I was young, she would sometimes go on girls' trips, and she'd leave little gifts and notes for my sister and I to open each day while she was gone. All of this just really showed me that mom is still her own person. She still has her own life, her own friends, her own hobbies, her own career, outside of me and my sister and my family. She found the time to make it all work, and I never felt like we came second. So as I now work to build my own family-focused business, I always think of my mom and the life and family she has built in complete admiration. I feel so lucky to have grown up with the ultimate mother hustle role model right under my own roof as my own mom. So thanks, Mom.
Thank you, Emily, for that beautiful dedication to your mother, whose commitment to being a present mother while also investing in herself, in her friendships, her interests, and her contribution connect beautifully to the themes of this conversation. In this episode, we talk about what shaped my mother and Sandy as they emerged from the stable years of the 40s and 50s into the tumultuous times of the 60s and 70s. the ways they sought to have impact beyond their family as women when there were fewer opportunities open to them, how they invested in their own interests and friendships while raising their children, and looking back now, the wisdom and advice they would offer to their younger selves. The 50th anniversary of their book club and how it's been one of the most important constant in their lives is a thread we weave throughout the episode, and the challenge they offer us is to read the books that they felt made a profound impact on them. They share the reason behind the success and longevity of their book club and friendship, and also some snapshot moments from across the years that they will always remember. Stay through to the end for a funny blooper reel, capturing some behind-the-scenes moments of what it took to persevere through the challenges to record the podcast episode. It was a testament to the power of what's possible with today's technology, how different that is from what they grew up with, and to holding a growth mindset no matter what your age. The episode marks the end of Season 2 and the start of some time off from podcasting for me until Season 3 begins in February. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and join the email list so you'll get updates when the Season 3 begins. And if you want to stay connected through the break, join the Mother's Quest Facebook group, where I will continue to share resources, favorite episodes from past seasons, and personal reflections. I loved the perspective and inspiration that shines through this unique conversation on the podcast, and I hope you will too. So get comfortable, pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee, or maybe a glass of wine, and settle into the wisdom from these two lifelong friends. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Hello, Mom and Sandy. Welcome to episode number 34, the last official episode for Season 2 of the Mother's Quest podcast.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
I'm so excited to have both of you on for this conversation. And just, it really is amazing. It took a lot of coordination. I think both of you have not had the experience yet of using some of this technology. And I think it is just a testament to your grit and perseverance that we're all here. That's all working perfectly. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation with you.
You made it happen, Julie.
What we're going to do, first of all, I like to share why I had you on the podcast. Every guest I invite for a different reason. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to close this season, last season I ended with an episode with my son, Ryan. And I just immediately thought I've been wanting to have you on the podcast, Mom. And when I was thinking about what is something really unique and special that I've observed about your life, I thought about your book club and the incredible community of women that have been a part of that. And then I remembered that you said that this is the 50-year anniversary of that book club, which is just remarkable. And so I wanted to have you and Sandy, who is the original founder, on to talk about your epic lives and what we can learn from you, and to mark just this incredible milestone in your book club.
I do really think of this as a major milestone. I love going around telling people I've been in the book club for 50 years, and they kind of look at me oddly.
It is unbelievable. And we're going to get a chance to talk more about the book club and what has made it so special and so enduring. But the first question, I typically ask my guests to tell me a little bit about their childhood and the impact that their mother had on them. But when I was thinking about this conversation with the two of you, I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about your own epic life journey. In summary, if you were to think about the story arc of your life until now, and what impact being a mother, grandmother, has had on shaping who you are today.
I grew up in the 50s, 40s and 50s, had a tranquil life. And when I finished school, I became a teacher because that was one of the two things that were open to me at the time. There were some pioneers who became doctors and lawyers, but most women I know either became a nurse or a teacher. And What I have learned from my own children and grandchildren and watching them grow and blossom is that they are in a position where the world is open to them, and they have all become very successful in their own arena. And Julie, you've sort of followed in my footsteps, but in a much more involved way, because it encompasses almost all of your day. And I think you have a greater impact on people than I ever did. But I think we share the same values.
Mom, say a little bit about, I agree. I think I have wanted to emulate you in many ways, and it has looked a little bit different for me. But say a little bit about your social justice roots and the ways in which you were wanting to have an impact in your life.
Well, I grew up in New York City, where there was a lot more contact among the people of different races, colors, religions. And I went to a college that was also very integrated. And in my junior year of college, I applied for a job to become an after-school counselor in an area where children were not afforded that opportunity. And so we went out, my counterpart and I. He happened to have been a Black student from NYU, and I was a white student from Hunter College. And we had to go out into the neighborhood. We had to knock on doors. We had to explain to whoever was the caretaker for the children what we were about to do. And we started an after-school program, which opened my eyes to many things about communities of color and underprivileged. And then in the course of my life, I was one of the first Head Start teachers. And again, dealt with children who were getting a better start in life than they would ordinarily have. And we had some very moving examples of trauma in the course of our lives. We had the civil rights movement, and we had the deaths of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. And that also had a tremendous impact on my desire to do more, to make a more equitable society, to do my part.
Yeah, I think one of the things, as we're going through a difficult and challenging time in our country right now, and one of the things that has in some ways comforted me, and you and I have talked about a few times, is remembering that we've also moved through in this country really tumultuous time. And so knowing that you lived through it and you found ways to make a difference and be active, and we kind of came out the other end of some of those most tumultuous years, has been really helpful. Thank you for sharing that, Mom. Sandy, what about you? Tell me a little bit about your life story.
Well, in some ways, it's very much like your mother's, and in one crucial way, it's extremely different. I grew up as one of three children in a very comfortable, not a very difficult childhood. I had a professor in college who once said that the generation who was in college in their 50s, meaning we graduated from high school in the middle 50s or late 50s, that we were actually the most boring generation he'd ever seen. That because all the things that your mom referred to really took place in the 60s. And so we didn't have my life was not difficult growing up. I liked school. I was a good student. Somewhere along the way, I became very, very interested in politics, and my dad loved that. And so we had that to share and to talk about all the time. And if I can just do a big leap, when you talk about influences on your kids and them on you and your grandchildren, the other day, my oldest granddaughter, somebody said to her, had a conversation with somebody, and the person said to her, I am so sick of what's going on in the world today, both internationally and personally, with all this harassment, etc. I've just stopped listening to news and I've stopped reading the paper.
Yeah.
And my 20-year-old granddaughter, I could cry when I say this, she responded to the person and said, well, if you don't know what's going on, then how do you know how you're going to help or what you're going to do? And I think I'd like to think that that was kind of a motto of my life. It's when I started having children, I was a homemaker, but I always worked outside the home part-time, also in teaching. The big difference between your mom and me that she mentioned is that I grew up in a very homogeneous background. And the kids at my high school were basically white and of one ethnic group.
Where did you grow up, Sandy?
I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And just for people who know Detroit now, whenever I say to people that I grew up in Detroit, they say to me, no, you mean you grew up in West Bloomfield? I said, no, when I grew up in Detroit. There wasn't a West Bloomfield. It's where we used to go for rides on Sundays. But now it's where all my peers who I went to school with live. And so it was a very segregated city and versus like Manhattan. And so I didn't really have contact with, and my high school also had tracking, college preparation, occupational or general or something like that. And so by being in the college tracking program, I only came into contact with more people like myself. And it wasn't until the busing days that I really became very acquainted with other communities and had a job that did exactly similar to what your mom would go out. A white person would go out with either a Hispanic or a Black person, and we would go to different neighborhoods and different schools and try to convince people to accept the idea of busing. I won't go off on a tangent that it really didn't work.
Right.
And that very fact that it didn't work played a role in my life at another time also. But I think that conversation at our dinner table, both when I was a child and when I was a parent raising my kids, was constant. And it was not about other people, or it was about what people were doing. And those three significant assassinations that your mom mentioned were very big points in my life also. And I turned into be a little bit more of an activist than I thought I would, even though basically during the really significant things that were going on, meaning the civil rights movement, I was having babies. I had 3 children within 4 years. So my activism turned a little in volunteer work. And I think my children, from our discussions at home that were nonstop, as well as some outside influences, of course, was that activism was a way to social justice was really an extremely important value, maybe the most. And in one way or another, they've each kind of followed some path in doing things for social justice.
Yes, I'm thinking about, I was reading an article recently about your daughter Stephanie, where she was highlighted. Was it the LA Magazine?
It was LA Magazine, yes.
Yes. And I had that same experience of just realizing what an impact you must have had on her and my mom has had on me. And as you described with your granddaughter, it's really a multi-generational passing down of the values that I really appreciate. I'm thinking about my niece, Nicole, who, when she wrote in an application for Teach for America, which she ended up doing for 2 years in New Orleans, she talked about the impact of coming home after school and being with my mom, watching the political shows and the news of the day and engaging in conversations about what's happening in our country. And I know it's just really had a really big impact on many generations.
I would like to think that our home and the people Stephanie was connected with, etc., but had influence on her, and I'm sure it did. But she has gone above and beyond what I could have ever expected or what I could have ever done. It's just really amazing. And I think that her kids are extremely proud of her. And sometimes when you have a parent, usually a mom, that's in the spotlight so much, the kids are a little jealous of that attention or whatever. But her kids do not react that way. They come to all of her functions. They love it. They're proud of her. And it's just wonderful to see.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I want to hear more about the story of your book club. It is,
Okay.
these incredible 50 years that you've all been committed to it. Sandy, I understand you were the original founder. Tell us a little bit about how it started.
Well, I think the original idea really came from Judy Duroff, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And she talked about it with her friend and neighbor, Marilyn Groper. And then Judy moved to the Valley, and she was my very first friend in Los Angeles. And approximately 50 years ago to this day, I remember exactly where I was sitting, and I was pregnant with Stephanie, which is why I always remember the time so precisely. And she said to me, "What do you think about a woman's book club?" And really, neither of us had ever really heard of that before. But I immediately conjured something up in my head when she said it. And I said, that is such a fabulous idea. Because
was it actually a new idea at the time?
Yes. Now, I'm not saying that there's no book club in the country that has been going longer than 50 years, but it was really a new concept to us.
Wow.
And I remember saying to her, we have all these friends who are college educated, worked for a few years as a teacher before we started having our families, and we're not doing much to stimulate our brains, and everybody would love it. And so from that point on, Judy and I and Marilyn Groper, we just started calling other people and asking them if they wanted to be a part of it. How we landed on Tuesday for lunch and book club, I don't know. But I was thinking about it today, Julie, and you had asked an earlier question as to what do I attribute the success to. I attribute the success, we had, I think, as many as 13 or 14 people at one time. We're probably down to 12 now. And it became equally as important to every member. Mm. Unless you were deathly ill, a child was deathly ill, or were on a trip, nobody ever missed book club. Nobody made an alternate plan on that day to go somewhere else or do something. we all took it very seriously. And we started out using a Brandeis University syllabus. And for about 6 years, we used that syllabus until we had read all the books in it. And then we decided that we would just come up with our own books from book reviews in the paper, in the New York Times, or wherever. The other very interesting decision we made is that we self-led. We never hired a person to lead the book club. And many of us had taught great books when our kids were in public school, and we knew how to ask open-ended questions, and we knew how to do the research on things. And it just became a huge success that it was everyone's favorite day of the month. It's like we loved getting together with book club. Sometimes our lunch lasted a little longer, and still do, than it should, before we get to discussing the book, but we discuss our kids, our travels, all kinds of other things. And unfortunately, 50 years later, we have lost to death 3 people. Certain people's spouses have died, and some of our members have gotten considerably older, and so the driving has become a problem. But there's still a hardcore of us that wouldn't ever think of missing it. And that's how it's just been a wonderful experience.
And one of those hardcore members is definitely you, Mom.
Yes, she
remember,
is.
I think, from the time I have memories, I remember you holding your book club in the way that you just described, Sandy, as like something that is really sacred and also something that you look forward to. I also remember how, you have this rotation where sometimes you're the one that's doing the research and leading the discussion, but sometimes you're the one that's hosting. So I have memories of, the weeks when it was my mom's turn to host the club in our home. But Mom, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about, how and when you joined and what you think has been so special about this book club.
The reason that you remember this so well, Julie, is because I joined the book club when I was pregnant with you. And so I've been a member for more than 45 years, which is all of your life. And Sandy alluded to the fact earlier that we were stay-at-home moms. Most of us did not have jobs outside the home while we were raising our children. And so the need for intellectual stimulation was great because all of us had come from some space where we had gone to college and enjoyed that kind of opening of the mind and became school teachers. And as Sandy said, many of us led junior grade books in an after-school program at our children's school. And so it was stimulating not just to be a part of a book club with very intelligent women, but to also do the research. In a way, it was a little like going back to school. And so those are the memories I have of why I enjoyed it so much years ago. And then you bond with all the people who are in it. They mean so much to you. You share all the joys and the sorrows through the years. And I think the most important thing, as Sandy said, we're all committed to the book club. People read the book. There are lots of book clubs where people come, they didn't like what they read, they enjoy their lunch or their tea and coffee and prefer to just talk to each other. And that's okay too, but that's not a book club.
Julie, one of the things that you can't begin to appreciate, nor can Stephanie, and I was pregnant with her, is that we didn't have computers in those 50 years ago.
Oh, God, yes.
And so doing the research was a very big deal. I remember going to Cal State Northridge and using their library and really looking up material like I did in college.
Yeah.
Right. Microfiche.
That's right. And we could, running things off on a Xerox machine. And it is simple now compared to what we used to do.
I have memories of going to the library with you, Mom, and looking, spending time looking things up. Well, I want to shift gears. First of all, I just really appreciate hearing, how seriously you took the book club at its inception and how, the high standard that you hold, the rigor that you hold around reading the book, researching, having engaging discussion about it still endures today. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, you've mentioned that there have been many moments, highs and lows through these years together. I often talk on the podcast about something called an epic snapshot moment in our lives. Those kinds of moments that you can just remember so clearly, or sometimes it's something that just fills you with so much joy and gratitude that it feels like that moment is bottled in time. I'm really curious if there are a few epic snapshot moments when you look back on those 50 years that come to mind, some really special moments in your book club.
Well, in a way, it has nothing to do with book club, but one of the moments that stands out in my mind so strongly is the fact that on the day after, I think it was the day after or the day of 9/11, we were supposed to have our book club meeting at Murky Rowan's house, and there was discussion about whether we should have it or not have it. Everybody was so distraught. And in the end, we decided that we were better together than apart. Mm-hmm. And that was a very meaningful moment.
Fran, we had another experience. I believe that Judy died like on a book club day. And that was really a blow to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, she was the real originator of it. She had the idea of it. And the other people, myself included, really helped execute the whole thing. But Judy really had the brainstorm. And I think for the exact reason that your mom, that Fran just said about 9/11, it was like our leader, well, it wasn't like our leader died. Our leader did die. Mm-hmm. And it was really a moment that we all wanted to be together. And we had time, thinking about the funeral and other things a little later. But I think we were all together on that day, too.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like what better way to honor her memory than to do what she loved so much. She was a librarian too, right? I have memories of her helping me find books at our temple.
She was a part-time librarian at Temple Judea for many years, 17 to 20 years. And she would read to kids in the classes. She would help the classes find books. Those were also the days when we had things called card catalogs. One of my previous lives, I was also a public school librarian.
Well, one of the things I'm really appreciating about this conversation is just the amount of life that you've both lived and the perspective that you have to share. I was mentioning earlier that the premise of this podcast is about, mothers being on a quest to live what I call an epic life, the kind where you feel like your life is filled with all the things that matter or that would make for a great story, like the stories that you've read in so many of your book club discussions. And I'm going to ask you, EPIC is also an acronym mnemonic for the guideposts that I believe help us to live that kind of life when we're raising our children. And I'm going to ask you to share some words of wisdom from your many years of life and perspective to help guide me and any other mothers who are listening. So the first guidepost, E, stands for engaged, and it's about being engaged mindfully with our children, and in your case, with your grandchildren too. Mom, why don't you share what would be some of your biggest words of wisdom from your own life experience that might help guide me?
Well, I think the fact that I had interests outside of the home was helpful, not only to my own happiness, but I think I included you in a lot of the things that we did. When Karen was little, I was part of a community action group, and it was right after the death of our president and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. And we formed this group actually through the North Valley Jewish Community Center, which was, I would say, our home away from home. And I think you felt that way too, Julie, right?
I did.
And we did a lot of good things through that group. We had meetings with our counterpart in Pacoima where we shared information and feelings, which I think were very helpful. And we, in those days, there were box boys. They were called box boys in supermarkets. And I recall that we were kind of instrumental in getting these box boys an increase in their salary and the ability to move up. And your sister Karen often marched on our picket lines. And I know that you and Debbie have wonderful, fond memories of the Jewish Center plays that we did, some of which you were in, and even the ones you weren't in. So between being a mother in the house and having my own experiences out of the house, and the fact that the three of you were able to participate in them, I think that was a very good thing.
Yeah, without question. Well, and absolutely, it's funny, Ryan, at the time of this recording, my oldest son, Ryan, your grandson, just was in a musical. And I've been really reflective about what formative experiences I had participating in those community center plays alongside you or sometimes watching you. And yeah, so I think that is something that I've taken with me too, is to pursue and find the things that I enjoy or that I think matter, and then engage my children in that. We are on the second guidepost in the EPIC framework, P, which stands for passionate and purposeful. And this is the guidepost that is about making a difference beyond your family. Sandy, I wanted to hear how this guidepost has shown up in your life.
Okay. Your mother had alluded to something like this earlier, but for me, having my own work outside of the home became very, very important. And I had a vision when I was younger that I would go to law school once Irv was finished with medical school. But he didn't think that was a very good vision because it would be very disruptive to our lives. But I felt incomplete and not really having something that I could call my own. So after working in various other jobs and part-time teachings, I did a lot of substituting. I decided I wanted my doctorate. And my goal was to really teach on the college level. Anyway, this was a turning point in my life. I was 44 years old. And I remember going to 3 people to pick their brains and to talk about getting a doctorate. I had already gone back to school for 7 years to get my master's, but that was easy for me to kind of arrange because it was near my house and I was still home a lot, etc. This was a much bigger commitment. And one person said to me, look, I said, I expect it'll take 6 or 7 years. And they said, you're going to be 50, whether you go or you don't go. So you might as well be 50 and have your doctorate if it's something that means that much to you. And that's what I did. Only I didn't finish it by 50, so I didn't want to acknowledge that birthday. I finished it at 51, and I gave myself a big graduation party. And the book club was a big part of discussion at the party, too.
Mm.
Anyway, after that, I didn't really get a job. Well, I taught part-time at CSUN for 6 semesters. But what I did is I worked full-time as a fundraiser, as a development director for the College of Education. And it turned out that I absolutely loved it. And I worked 10 years at CSUN, and then I was given a very big raise when I thought I was going to retire, and I went to Pacific Oaks, a very special private school in Pasadena. And I felt that by me doing those 2 things, the actual working and the going to get the doctorate, I felt complete. And now I'm back to just enjoying retirement. I do lots of other things for myself, but I have lots of time to spend with my grandchildren. And it's just rounded out my life beautifully.
Well,
And
don't
there were
forget to
4.
tell everybody that you were sitting on a grand jury
I know.
and that you are a docent at the
Thank you,
Skirball
my
Museum.
publicist. I spent a year on the grand jury as the foreman pro tem, and I became a docent at the Skirball Cultural Center, as I referred to earlier. And as Irv said, she really didn't retire. She just stopped being paid for what she was doing, and she just created these other activities to do, which is something that I know is necessary for me. I need to constantly have goals and do them.
I have some curiosity, Sandy, about what it took to make that decision to go back to school and to get your doctorate. What do you think was the final impetus for you to choose following that desire of yours? Because I think many of us, many people listening could relate to this idea of, like, I call them like the whispers, these things that nag at you of something you always wish or thought you should do, and we often don't answer them. So what do you think it was that caused you to finally say yes to that?
I think in my much younger days, I always loved school. I always loved being on a campus. And I used to have this fantasy that I would marry a professor. And then as I got older and I married a physician, I thought, I'll be the professor. And it was just something gnawing at me that I wanted this special academic accomplishment for myself. Yeah. And the bonus was really that I had such a great experience for 14 or 15 years at the 2 schools, that I worked at. And the impetus was so great. I don't think I felt complete until I really earned my doctorate. Even though I always had worthwhile activities that I was doing, et cetera, I really think that's the thing that made me feel very complete.
One thing I'm struck by right now is the creation of Mother's Quest, and this podcast in many ways was a similar process for me of this, something that had been nagging at me, something that didn't feel complete, a way in which, even though I had a really wonderful life, I didn't feel like I was living what I would call now my epic life. And it was something about my 45th birthday, which is not far from where you were when you were making changes, that caused something to shift. So I've started to call this time in my life my midlife renaissance.
That's beautiful. I guess that's what I had.
It's interesting.
But that's a wonderful metaphor.
Well, I want to move to the next guidepost, which is I. It stands for invested in yourself. And Mom, this is something I've really admired about you, or all the ways in which you have nurtured yourself and your interests. What would be your words of wisdom about this guidepost for me?
Well, in a way, I think you've answered it for yourself. and that is to listen to your heart and the things that bring you satisfaction, and be lucky enough to be able to do them. Sometimes, if you're a married person, it takes a willing spouse to share the household and family chores. And if you're lucky enough to have that kind of cooperation, then it makes it a little easier to go out and follow your
Absolutely.
heart and do the things that make you feel like you've done something worthwhile, or fill some void that's within you that gives you pleasure.
Right. And what would you say for you were the choices that you made throughout your life that filled you?
Well, I was always interested in acting, and our North Valley Jewish Community Center had a wonderful group of people, and we did plays in the winter, and in the summer we did big musicals in our outdoor amphitheater. We had a very active political group, and we did what I thought were some helpful things along the way to make life better in this world. And then, of course, the book club, which gave me great pleasure and satisfied that intellectual need.
And I still really appreciate, when you and I talk almost every day, sometimes more than one time a day. And almost every time I'm talking to you, there's something that you're on your way to do. It's some lecture or, going to Montecito to hear, young, what is it, jazz musicians that you go to. That's one of your favorite traditions.
Yeah, it's all kinds of music. It's usually piano and violin.
Yeah, and just like
And I do
speaking,
that with her too.
you
Yes,
do that
we're a team.
together. So I just really appreciate how you have so many varied interests and you seek these things out. And you also do them in community, as you just mentioned, the two of you are a team. The next guidepost, C, stands for connected. And it's about being in community on our journey. Sandy, maybe you can close out our words of wisdom on the EPIC framework with what you think are the biggest pieces of advice you have about finding and sustaining those connections.
It's interesting that you asked that because I just had a very long conversation with somebody who, her second marriage, she was married to somebody who was 20 years older than she. And of course, he died and in his late 80s, which is normal. And she's just like 70. And she is so lonely. And she said to me, "You have such a large group of friends and you're involved in so many things. I'm never going to say that it's easy to lose a spouse when you've had a wonderful marriage. But our group, and in the largest sense of it, your mother's got the same thing, only in two different cities, is very, very fulfilling. It's also filled with a tremendous amount of responsibility and time. And I'm seeing it more and more as our friends are getting older and older. But it's a very enriching experience to have these friends to do things with, to travel with, to still be playful when we're in our late 70s and 80s. And I just think that keeping yourself as involved in whatever area it is that makes you feel good. And of course, there's a lot of losses. I mean, you don't remember the things as well as you should have. If you were athletic, you usually have slowed down. You get more tired. You're usually more tired than you used to be. It's like our kids are all in their 50s now. And we kind of, in my head, I sort of think that's my age. Well, I know it's not. But I just think that the key to everything is to keep yourself involved and to keep connected with other people who are like you, who are different than you, but who you adore being with.
I love that.
And I will say that Sandy is one of the most wonderful people who has nurtured that kind of loving community. And those of us who are friends with her are very grateful.
Thank you, Fran.
The question that's coming to my mind now, before we move to the last part of this conversation, I'm wondering if you looked back to your younger self. So let's say maybe your 40-year-old or 45-year-old selves. What do you think you would want to tell that person now, given the perspective that you have?
Well, if I had one thing to do over in raising my children, I would say no less times than I did. It's not such a big deal, what they're asking for. And I think that's why I don't think your mother was as strict as I was. And I wish I had said no less. And I can see with my grandchildren that I just want to enjoy them and do as much as I can for them. But I don't know that that answers your question if I were talking to 45-year-olds. I think the only thing I would say is to build your own community of friends and family and fulfill a dream like I talked about before.
Yes. I love that. I want to mention, maybe this might be a book you want to pick up, Sandy, since I know you love books. Shonda Rhimes wrote a book, I think it's called The Year of Yes. So the flip side to your say no less is to say yes more. And
that's right.
She wrote an amazing book about all the ways in which, when she said yes to her children and also in her life, incredible things happened for her. So we'll include a link in the show notes to that book. Mom, what about you?
That's great.
Well, I think if I had advice to give those who are in their 40s, I don't think that I had the strength to go back to school and do something that was in my mind, but I'm not sure that I would have accomplished it. I always had this vision of myself working for the Rand Corporation or being very involved politically, but it took time away from my family and my husband, and I think I was afraid to try.
If I can just add an addendum to that, Julie, my real goal was to finish my doctorate and not get a divorce. Because there was one woman in our program who finished the program that took me 7 years to do. It took her 2.5. But you can't finish a doctorate properly in 2.5 years, nor should you, because you don't have enough time to process and to read and to explore what you should be. That's the purpose of going back. And sure enough, she was divorced after 2.5 years. I mean, it's like your mom said, there's just so much of us. You can't maintain a family and a spouse and school at that intensity and make it all work.
And so, given all of that, Mom, then what is your advice? It is to listen to your desire, or it's to, how do you navigate?
I think you have to make a choice. If my desire was as strong as Sandy's, I guess I would have figured out a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was afraid to try. So I would say, listen to your heart. And if it's something that's that important to you, then go after it.
Yeah.
As I think you are right now.
I think it's fabulous what you're doing, Julie.
Thank you, Sandy.
Really fabulous.
Well, I'm excited mostly because I love being able to share conversations like these with other people. First of all, I love to have it for myself. I always feel like I'm just soaking in all the wisdom And this tonight was a special conversation. But I also love that I can offer it to other people and to those who I have, to each of you, to give you the space to reflect. It feels like generosity all around. So before we move into the final acknowledgments, which I feel like I've already begun, I want to give each of you a chance to give me a challenge. This is something everyone I bring on the podcast does. But, to close the theme of the celebration of your 50 years of book club, wanted to ask each of you to share one book that you read in your club that really made a lasting impression on you and that you think that I should read to support me in living my epic life.
That's a wonderful question. Fran, do you want me to go or do you want to go?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I thought about the books that we have read over the years, and there are so many to pick from.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought in terms of mothers and children, I thought the book Room by Emma Donahue would be something that would be worthwhile for you to read, for any mother to read, because it deals with the incredible love that a mother has for her son and the way she nurtured him and kept him safe under the most horrendous circumstances. So I think you will get something out of that reading.
I saw the movie and I was incredibly struck by it. And I take that challenge. I think I would really enjoy reading the book. And
I think you would too, because you get, even though the movie was really good, there's an immersion that happens when you're involved in reading the story itself.
yeah, I agree. Just an incredible testament of the power of what a mother can do for her child and how much one of the themes that weaves through a lot of these conversations on the podcast is the power of perspective. And that's something that really struck me when I watched the movie, how, she made a choice to envision their life together as one that could still be rich and meaningful, even given all of the horror and constraints of it. So I look forward to reading that. Thanks, Mom. Sandy, which one do you recommend for me?
Well, number one, I want to underscore that I think your mother happens to be an incredible mother. But I would agree with, and I would agree with everything that she said about the book Room. Mine is totally different than that, even though I would put that real high on my list also. The book that has stayed with me forever is The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien. And it's a book about the Vietnam War. And we lived through the Vietnam War. We were in the Air Force, and Irv did all the examinations on the people who went off to war during those years.
Wow.
And I was very interested in following, because I always liked to follow politics, et cetera, et cetera. But reading that book gave me a feeling that, without really knowing, because you can never really know unless you're in their footsteps, but really knowing what it was like to be in that war and what damage it does to people emotionally and mentally. And we understand much more of it today than we did after Vietnam. And those were and something about Tim O'Brien's writing just made me feel as though, I remember saying at book club that day, this is the first time I really feel I understand what people went through during this war. I imagine there's parts of it that are the same in all wars, but in this war. And for some reason, it just has really stuck with me. And it saddens me, it really saddens me to realize now how insensitive and unprepared our country was for these soldiers coming back.
Yeah.
And they've suffered greatly.
When I think about the book that Sandy recommended, or the one that I recommended, or the many, many books that we've read over the years that give us insight into someone else's experience in life and broadens our own understanding of the world, there's something invaluable about the book club that we belong to.
That's perfect.
This is the time when we get to reflect on what our biggest takeaways are from this conversation. And I can start, and then I'll pass it to each of you. I started to say already, I feel like this is just such a gift for me to have this time with both of you and to be reminded. I think one of the biggest takeaways is the power of friendship and shared experiences, and just to hear the many overlapping ways in which you both talked about your connection through the book club, but then the connection that you've had in other ways and the other things that you've done together, and how you've really invested in that for yourselves and in one another. I'm also struck by both of your commitment to politics and activism, and how those were values that you clearly passed on to your children and now grandchildren. And the tensions of motherhood, and how what is possible for mothers and women has really changed a lot, through the course of those 50 years that you've been connected through your book club. So thank you for this incredible opportunity, and I'm so excited to share it with anyone who's listening.
Thank you, Julie, for doing this.
What are your biggest takeaways, Sandy?
I just think it's made me be introspective and to go over and, think about all of these things. Your questions, I thought you said reflect on them. I wish I had more time that I had spent reflecting on them. But today really clinched the whole thing. And my takeaway is that I think this is a fabulous thing that you're doing. I think it's a fabulous way to communicate with people. One that was totally unfamiliar to me 6 hours ago. And now, as your mom said then, we're entering the 21st century. And I'm very proud of the way you have had the patience, Julie, to walk us through this and how outstanding it's been.
Thank you. I'm very proud of both of you for the way in which you've grown in your ability to try some new things on today in terms of all the technology and the sticking with it. What about you, Mom?
Well, I must say there was a lot of tension this afternoon, worrying about how we were going to get on Zoom and what we were going to say. But the experience has been really enriching. And Julie, I listen to your podcasts all the time, and I think they're so wonderful. And it was a real treat to be on it instead of just listening to it.
Well, I'm sure this will be a favorite episode for me and for many. Thank you so much. I know we're all tired. Have a restful evening, and I look forward to sharing this with you when it comes out.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
you, Julie.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, head over to mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and help us spread the word. I want to end with some words to light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.
Julie, I don't know where to turn off my sound.
Okay, I'm going to help you. You know where your mouse is, right? Your mouse or your...
Yeah, I've got my mouse.
Okay.
I
But
just
go
don't
to,
see.
go to the bottom of the screen, of the black screen where you see us, the video, not the bottom of your computer, the bottom of the actual Zoom box.
Oh, I see where it says Julie Neal.
Okay.
I don't have Julie Neal on mine.
Well, here's what I have. You don't want me to go to the part that's black that has the E and a Sandy, you have to sit on a cushion because all we ever see of you is
You
your.
know what? I'm on Irv's chair in our computer room, and it's very low.
You both want
I
to
know.
press? You want to press
We see the
start?
top of your glasses, but now I'm not up there, and neither is she. What are we
No,
supposed to do?
we only see Julie.
Why
Yeah.
don't you press?
Adorable Julie.
Why don't you press start video?
Okay, gotta find it. Oh, start video. There it is.
And there you see my glasses
Hey,
and my
there you
hair.
are. Your nose, your glasses, and the top of your head.
Okay,
Ah.
Sandy, put your
Here,
head all the way up, and I'm going to take a picture so we can.
Okay, thank you again for doing this.
Yours off too.
Turn mine off.
Your video off.
I should say stop video.
Yes.
Oh, you just want us to talk.
Yeah, now we're going to disappear from view.
My screen says meeting topic,
Yeah,
hosting.
mine too.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't need to worry about any.
And I'm participant ID 62. That's my age.
Very funny. Well, then my age is 56.
Oh, well.
All right. I think we're going to get started. Okay, click on that.
Okay.
And then if you click the search at the bottom right.
On the bottom right. And if worst comes to worst, on Tuesday, you'll show me in person. At our book club celebration.
Yeah, actually, if you're at a book club celebration, you should give everyone a tutorial so that they'll be able to.
Okay.
Don't count on it.
You can tell your stories of how this all happened.
Oh, that's fabulous. And thank you, Julie, for your patience. You've been incredible.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.